The galactic bazaar of Theta 7 sprawled across 3 square kilometers of prefabricated domes and open-air markets, a chaotic symphony of 1,000 species bartering, trading, and surviving. Clark Chen stood behind his stall, ranging salvaged human artifacts, sold watches, circuit boards, and pre-war photographs. When he first saw her, she was small, even for a Veilani child. Her skin shimmered with the characteristic bioluminescent patterns of her species, currently flickering an uncertain pale blue that Clark had learned meant anxiety or fear. Her slender fingers clutched 3 coins against her chest as she approached his stall. With hesitant steps, "Mister?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her translator device crackling with static. "Mr. Human?" Clark set down the watch he'd been examining and crouched to meet her eye level. "Yeah, kiddo. That's me. What can I do for you?" The girl extended her small hand, revealing 3 utterly worthless pieces of corroded metal. They weren't even proper currency, just rusted washers from some ancient machinery, the kind scattered by the thousands in the station's lower levels. "Is this enough?" she asked, her luminescent patterns shifting to a hopeful yellow-green. "To buy a dad?" The question hit Clark like a plasma bolt to the chest. Around them, the marketplace continued its cacophony, oblivious to the weight of those words. He glanced around, searching for an adult Veilani, a guardian, anyone. But the child stood alone. "What's your name?" Clark asked gently. "Zira." "Okay, Zira. Where are your parents?" The yellow-green faded to a deep, mournful purple. "Mama went to the stars 3 cycles ago. The sickness. And I never had a papa." She looked down at her coins, then back up at Clark. "But I've been watching. I've been watching you, Mr. Human. You help people. You fixed Mrs. Korthax's breathing machine. You gave food to the Dralian twins when they had no credits. You're kind." Clark felt something crack inside his carefully maintained emotional armor. Since the war had ended and Earth had joined the Galactic Council, he'd been drifting through the outer stations, keeping his head down, avoiding attachments. Humans were still new to the galactic community, still viewed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Zira, He paused, searching for the right words. "You can't buy a dad. That's not how it works." Her patterns dimmed to almost black, and she turned to leave. "Wait," Clark heard himself say. "Why do you need a dad?" She turned back, and the story spilled out. Her mother had died from a plague that ravaged the lower stations. The orphan collective was full. She'd been sleeping in maintenance tunnels, eating scraps, avoiding the gangs that preyed on vulnerable children. She'd watched Clark for weeks, noting his kindness, his protection of the weak, the way other merchants respected him despite his species being newcomers, the Cravathi gang. She whispered, "They say I have to work for them," or she didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Clark knew what happened to children who fell into the gang's clutches. He looked at the small alien child, so different from humanity and yet so heartbreakingly the same, alone, scared, desperate. And he thought about what it meant to be human, not the biology, not the DNA, but the choice, the conscious decision to stand against the darkness, to protect the vulnerable, to be better than circumstances demanded. "Those coins," Clark said slowly, standing up and reaching for them. "You know what? I think that's exactly the right price." Zira's patterns erupted in a brilliant gold. "Really, really. But being a dad isn't like buying a thing, Zira. It's a partnership. We have to work together. Can you do that?" She nodded so vigorously her translator nearly fell off. Clark extended his hand, and she placed the 3 rusty coins in his palm. He pocketed them solemnly, as if completing a sacred transaction. "Then welcome to the family, kiddo." The next weeks were chaos. Clark had never raised a child, much less an alien one. But Catherine Morris, the human doctor who ran the station's free clinic, became an unexpected ally. "You adopted her with 3 rusty washers?" Catherine laughed when Clark brought Zira in for a health check. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard. Is it stupid?" Clark asked while Zira explored the clinic with newfound energy, her patterns bright with curiosity. Catherine's expression softened. "It's brave. The galaxy thinks we're these aggressive, illogical creatures. But this, taking in a child not your species, from a world you've never seen, because it was the right thing to do." She shook her head. That's why humanity belongs out here, Clark. Not because we're the strongest or the smartest. Because we choose compassion even when it's inconvenient. The Cravathi gang came calling 2 weeks later. 3 of them, heavily armed, demanding Zira be turned over. Clark stood in front of his stall, Zira behind him, and felt the weight of every human who'd ever stood against tyranny settle on his shoulders. "She's my daughter," he said simply. "You'll have to go through me." The lead Cravathi, a massive reptilian creature, laughed. "You're one human, alone." "He's not alone," Catherine said, stepping up beside Clark, a plasma cutter in her hand, ostensibly a medical tool. "But deadly enough." "None of us are," said Mrs. Corthax, the elderly Antarian whose breathing machine Clark had repaired. She stood with a dozen other merchants. The Cravathi looked at the growing crowd, humans and aliens united, and slowly backed away. Some battles weren't worth fighting. That night, as Zira slept in the small apartment above Clark's stall, curled up in blankets, her patterns cycling through peaceful blues and greens, Clark sat at his workbench. He'd attached those 3 rusty coins to a chain, wearing them around his neck. They were worthless metal. They were everything. Because a small alien girl had taught him that family wasn't about biology or species, or even planets. It was about the choice to show up, to protect, to love. It was about being human in the best sense of the word, not just Homo sapiens, but someone who chose kindness in a universe that often demanded cruelty. He touched the coins and smiled. Best purchase he'd ever made.